My name is Donald. And tell me something, have you ever given your whole life to someone and in the end realized that you received much less than you gave? I asked myself this question last Father's Day, when something simple, almost silly, opened a wound that I thought had already healed. It's strange how a gift can reveal truths that we've tried to ignore for years. Sometimes a detail is enough to show that something is out of place, that love no longer weighs the same on both sides. I know that many people who listen to my story may have already felt this same pang in their chest, that mixture of doubt, surprise, and sadness that comes when we realize that someone we have raised with so much care no longer sees us in the same way. It is not easy to accept, but I understand you because that day I felt exactly that, and that's why I'm here. Because when this story ends, you will understand how a small gesture can hide a huge truth. You'll see with me what was really behind a pair of $15 socks and a $10,000 watch. And none of this was by chance. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know something. On that Father's Day, I received a $15 pair of socks, and that same night I saw with my own eyes my daughter's father-in-law showing off a 10,000 Rolex, bought with the money I had sent thinking it was for a medical emergency. At the time, I didn't scream. I didn't confront it. I just sat in silence, and I pulled each thread of this lie until it crumbled entirely before me. And when my daughter called me more than 17 times, it was too late. Because what I discovered, everything changed, and even though I had 1,000 reasons to forgive, at that moment I only had one left: to protect myself. If this story has ever touched some part of you inside you, if something about it feels familiar, or if you know someone who has been through something like this, then stay here with me. Sometimes telling these things hurts, but knowing that someone is listening helps more than it seems. If you can, leave a like, subscribe. Not only for me, but for all the silent stories that were never told. Today, I decided to tell mine. I woke up early that Sunday. Light poured through the blinds of the room, as it had always done since Ellen left. I prepared the coffee calmly, as if the smell could fill the void that only increases on the days of the scheduled date. Father's Day always tasted different after she passed away, but Olivia had sent a message saying that she would come, that she had a surprise. And even knowing how much her words sometimes carry more emptiness than promise, I confess that I let myself go. I dusted the frames, put sugar on the table — she always liked to sweeten her coffee too much — and wore my light blue shirt, the one she gave me on her 60th birthday. When the doorbell rang, my heart raced. I opened the door, and there it was, Olivia. Elegant, distant, as if it had come out of a window on Michigan Avenue. Liam came right behind with that polite smile that never convinced me. But he smiles. I always smile. There are things that we do more out of habit than out of will. She gave me a light hug, one of those that don't touch a soul, and held out a small bag. "Happy Father's Day, Dad." The bag was too light as the gesture. I sat on the couch and opened it. A pair of navy blue socks, cheap, with the tag still hanging, $15. "They're useful, aren't they?" she said, laughing as if handing a gift to the building's doorman, not to the father who mortgaged the future to pay for her college. I laughed too. I laughed with my mouth. The rest of my body froze. "Thank you, dear. They are practical." I folded my socks slowly, so as not to let the anger that ran through my veins escape like hot water. Liam made a random comment about how I was a simple guy. That hit me deeply. I'm simple, yes, but not stupid nor disposable. We talked little. They were in a hurry. They had commitments. A dinner with William, Liam's father, in River North. They made a point of saying that it was something special, reserved, important. "He always makes a point of celebrating dates like this," she said, with a twinkle in her eyes that I hadn't seen since she spent college. Only now it wasn't for me. It was by another man, a man she knew as an adult, who didn't carry her when he had a fever at 3, who didn't stop traveling to be with her in the hospital at 7, who didn't stay up all night to help her study algebra when she thought she was too dumb. After they left, I sat staring at the old clock on the wall. Tick-tack, tick-tack. Every second seemed to nudge me as if to say, "Did you see? Did you feel it?" Yes, I did. Yes, I did. But I kept quiet, as I always kept silent. I opened Instagram that night. I never liked these things very much, but once in a while I like to see what she posts. I feel closer. That's when I saw the photo. William smiling in a fine restaurant, leather strap in the background, and on his wrist, the Rolex, shining brighter than his smile. The caption, "To the best father-in-law in the world, a gift to match." I took a deep breath. I closed the app. I opened it again. I enlarged the image. It was him, the same model that I always admired in a downtown window, the same model that costs at least $10,000, and in that moment, something inside me changed. It wasn't just sadness. It was something deeper, a mixture of disappointment and lucidity, as if suddenly the blindfold fell from his eyes. And I saw what, deep down, I already knew. I paused there. I stared at the floor, the socks still on the coffee table, the label swaying in the breeze from the open window. And I thought, how do we raise someone with all our heart? And one day you discover that you have become just a detail in that person's life. If you've ever felt this, or if you know someone who has been through something like this, comment here. He just writes, "I've lived it," or "What pain," or "It touched me." Because sometimes we need to see that we are not alone to move forward. That night I didn't sleep, and I didn't cry. I just stood there, with the sound of the clock, remembering that time he charges, even from those who think they will never pay. And it was in this silence that a certainty was born. I needed to know more. What if the gift was not just a gift? What if that watch was just the tip of something much bigger? The next morning I made my coffee as usual. But the taste seemed different. It was the same old dust, the same water, the same old kettle, and yet bitter. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the cup, trying to remember when I started pretending I didn't see what was right in front of me. The last time Olivia called me asking for money was in March. She cried on the phone, said it was urgent. "Medical stuff, Dad. Very serious. I swear, I'll give it back to you." And I, as always, didn't think twice. I transferred the $10,000 that same day. I didn't even check, because when we love, we believe. When we love, even the lie comes disguised as truth. But now the pieces began to fall into place. I went back to Instagram. I went again to the Rolex photo. Enlarging the display, there it was. White dial, black ceramic bezel, Italian leather strap. It was the Daytona, one of the most expensive. I knew because years ago I walked into that Oak Street jewelry store just to look, never to buy. I knew that model by heart, the same one that now shone on the wrist of my daughter's father-in-law. Heart tight, I went to the closet where I keep my papers. I took my bank statements and sat down at the table. I set the date of the transfer, March 13th. Then I checked the monthly closing of the card, and there it was. I almost choked on the coffee. March 15th. Oak Street Jewelry, $10,200. The same card that Olivia used as an additional out of trust. She used it. 2 days after my deposit. He used my money, and it didn't go to any doctor. It was to buy a Rolex for her father-in-law. My body froze. I felt my hands sweat. But curiously, I didn't scream. I didn't break anything. I just stayed there, quiet. Silence sometimes screams louder than any scandal, and in that moment, I heard every word that was never spoken. I took the old printer from the corner of the office, connected it to the laptop, and printed the image from Instagram, along with the statement with the purchase line in red. As the paper came out, I felt like I was printing the truth, the one I refused to see for so long. You know when we feel like we've been left behind, but don't want to believe it because it hurts too much? That's that. I lived like this for years. She asked, I gave. She promised, I believed. But everything has a limit. And mine at that moment was achieved. Olivia didn't just lie. She exchanged her father for a symbol, for an expensive watch, for someone she has known for a few years. I was the man who held her hand at her mother's funeral. I was the one who bought notebooks, who slept in the hospital hallway, who signed a check for her wedding when my car barely started. And she bought a Rolex with my name on it, with my sweat. That printed paper was still warm when I folded it and put it inside an envelope. And there, at that moment, I knew this was not going to end like all the other times. I wasn't going to swallow another one. I was going to find out everything. There was more there. I felt it. The question that kept popping into my head was, how many other times did she do this without me knowing? And what else, besides the watch, did she hide from me? When I put away that envelope, with the proof of what she had done, I slowly returned to the room. I closed the door carefully, as if I wanted to muffle not only the sound, but also the pain that was already growing inside my chest. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the old wooden chest at my feet. I hadn't opened it for years. Inside, everything that was left of the life I built with Ellen, and then, alone with Olivia. I was pulling things slowly. A letter from her, written with colored pencils, saying that I was the best daddy in the world. A drawing of us in a park with a big sun smiling up there, and the photo of the day she passed the entrance exam. I looked finished, sweaty suit, but the smile tearing my face. I remember it as if it were yesterday. At that time, I had a small boat. It wasn't luxurious, but it was my plan for retirement. I dreamed of refurbishing the hull, painting Ellen's name on the side, and running the lakes of Wisconsin calmly. When the university tuition went up, I sold the boat. Without thinking, I didn't complain. I thought that one day she would understand the size of that gesture, but she never asked if I regretted it, and I never said it either. Then came the very expensive books of the MBA in Boston. The passages, the rent. Liam didn't have a penny in his pocket at the time. Who held it all? I got by with consulting jobs, used early retirement, tightened my belt, and every time she said, "Thank you, Dad," I thought it was worth it. Then came the wedding, a huge event in Lake Forest. She wanted everything perfect. He asked for help only with the buffet. When I saw it, I paid half of the wedding. Then came the renovation of the apartment they bought. "It's just a little help," she said. They needed to open the kitchen, change the floors. I made another transfer. "As soon as Liam is promoted, we'll start giving you back," she promised. I kept that as truth. Years passed. Nothing came back. But also, I never charged. I only asked for one thing, a very small one: respect, a gesture. A phone call that wasn't just to ask, a "Dad, how are you?" with no ulterior motives. But even that disappeared over time. And now, after all, the Rolex. That wasn't just a watch. It was a symbol, a summary of everything that went wrong. His brilliance blinded me, but it also made me see. For the first time, I asked myself, where did I go wrong? Have I been too generous? Or was I trying so hard to be present that I ended up teaching that I was an obligation, not a choice? The question haunted me all night. I turned from side to side on the bed, listening to the noise of the wall clock, marking the hours with the coldness that only time has. And it was there at dawn, with my eyes on the ceiling, that a memory came back like a punch. The day Ellen made me promise that she would take care of our daughter. But without forgetting me, did I forget? Or was it finally time to fulfill the other part of that promise? The part that said, if she ever forgets who you are, remember you. And that's when I understood. I needed to look at everything with different eyes. But what would I find? It would be even harder than the clock. And the question that haunted me now was, am I prepared to find out what comes next? The house was plunged into a silence that seemed to scream. I walked from one room to another as if looking for some noise, just so I wouldn't hear my own thoughts. Even the clock in the room seemed to strike more slowly. And there she was, Ellen's picture on the shelf. looking at me in that calm way, almost as if to say, "Now go, Donald. Now enough is enough." I ignored the phone all day. 17 calls. All of Olivia's, some with the name, others with restricted linking, but I knew it came from her. I didn't answer any, because honestly, I didn't want to hear excuses. I didn't want to hear justification. I needed silence to understand, to accept, and to decide. I went to the door, grabbed my coat and walked aimlessly. I ended up in the park where I took Olivia when I was a little girl. The same park, the same wooden bench where she sat with her feet dangling. I sat there, stared at the empty swing. The wind was blowing strong and cold, but I barely felt it. His chest was heavy, and it wasn't nostalgia. It was something else. It was the feeling of having been forgotten, replaced, like an old book that no one reads anymore. But that one day was everything to someone, and on this bench alone, I felt the bottom of the well for the first time. Not for the socks, not even by the clock, but because at that moment I understood that she had been gone for a long time, that Father's Day only showed what I refused to see, but there was also something new born inside me. It wasn't anger, it was strength, a silent force. The desire to never be seen as weak again. I'm here opening my heart, telling my story. If you're listening, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel because I still have a lot of things saved to tell you. Because after that day, I stopped going around in circles and I started to move forward. But you still don't know what I found out the following week. That did take me off my feet, and it changed everything. Everything. I returned home with a firmer step than when I left. My chest was still heavy, but something inside me was beginning to align. It was as if the pain had made room for clarity. It was no longer just heartache. It was a decision. I sat down in front of my old laptop, the one I only used to pay bills and watch the news, and started to put it all together. I opened the folder of the statements, printed the proof of the jewelry store again. The same paper on which it was written, black and white, that the money came out of my card. I put it in an envelope. I put on my coat and went to the bank branch on Glenview's main avenue. The manager had known me for years. I spoke calmly, but directly. "I want to block the additional card that is in my daughter's name and cancel all linked debts." She widened her eyes, tried to confirm. "Are you sure, Mr. Donald?" And I just said, "I have." That, for me, was like closing a door that had been open for too long. When I got home, I grabbed a blue folder and started putting everything that involved Olivia in it. Old contracts, receipts, printed messages, anything that had her name next to mine. It was almost like taking an emotional inventory. With each paper I kept, I felt a piece of history arranging inside me. I pulled out my phone, looked up the number of an old acquaintance, Brian Kessler, a lawyer in Northbrook. He was a colleague of a cousin of mine, but he was always honest and discreet. I sent only one sentence. "I need to talk. It's personal." Less than 20 minutes later, he replied, "Tomorrow at 2 p.m.? I replied, "I'll be there." The phone rang 5 more times that day, all of Olivia's. I wasn't even scared by the touch anymore. I didn't answer, because now it was no longer about listening. It was about acting. There would be no scandal. There was going to be no scene. But yes, there would be consequences, and little did I know that by touching that wound, I was about to discover things that would make Rolex the least of my problems. What did she do next? No one was prepared to see it, not even me. The next morning, I took the train to Chicago very early. I took with me the envelope with the image of the Rolex and the printed bank statement. I sat by the window and watched the grey landscapes of the city passing by. Each season I left behind seemed to move me away from the version of me that accepted everything quietly. When I got off at the Oak Street station, my heart was already beating strongly, not out of fear, but out of certainty. I walked slowly to the jewelry store, the same one where years ago I had stopped just to look at the windows. Entered. The smell of the place was the same. Polished wood, expensive perfume, quilted silence. I introduced myself to the manager, a polite young man named Michael. I showed the statement, I showed the photo. He asked for a minute and went to a computer in the back. He came back later with an uncomfortable look. "Mr. Donald, yes, this watch was sold right here, not long ago. It's in our system." I asked who made the purchase. He hesitated but confirmed, "Olivia M. Thompson, payment made on the final card, 4821. My heart stopped for a second. This ending, it was my card, my name. He continued, "She was accompanied by a younger boy. I think his name was Liam." I looked down, took a deep breath. I asked what was the reason for the purchase, and he replied without blinking, "She said it was a gift for her father-in-law. I wanted something striking of presence. I said he deserved the best." Thanked. Michael, perhaps out of embarrassment, handed me a copy of the invoice with the transaction data. I left the store with the envelope under my arm, but the weight was no longer his. It was all I knew now, for sure. No, I've always thought that betrayal is only when someone breaks your trust with direct words or actions. But there is a form of betrayal that hurts the most, the one that is done with class, with a smile on the face, with expensive perfume, and with our own name being used as a ladder. And if you've made it this far in history, listen to what I'm going to tell you now. What happened after that is what really changed everything, because so far I've only been deceived. But what I found out later showed me that there were people taking advantage of me for much longer than I imagined. And the question that kept hammering my head was, how far does lying go when the truth no longer has value? That afternoon, I arrived at Brian's office with firm steps but a half-hearted divide. He received me as he always did, with that firm handshake and a look that listened to more than many words. "Sit down, Donald. Tell me everything." I opened my blue folder calmly, as if revealing the pages of a lifetime. I delivered the statements, the prints, the Rolex invoice. I showed the history of the transfers, Olivia's requests, the audios, everything. He didn't interrupt. I just listened. I took notes. When I finished, he closed his briefcase, folded his hands and said, "Donald, this is serious. And unfortunately, it's not uncommon." The sentence hit dry. "It's not uncommon. How many fathers, how many mothers are used like this by those who have raised with so much love?" He suggested 3 immediate measures: freeze any joint property where Olivia's name was linked, revise and redo my will, removing her name from any automatic right, and start preparing preventive documentation in case she tried to file a lawsuit against me, which, according to him, could happen. That paralyzed me for a moment. "Do you really think she would do that?" I asked. He just looked at me. "Did you think she'd buy a Rolex with your money?" I took a deep breath. The truth hurts, but once it appears, you can't pretend you didn't see it anymore. I didn't want to punish her. It was never about revenge. I just wanted to protect myself, to give myself the right to age in peace without fear of being exploited again. Brian began drafting the first document. I signed with a firm hand, but with a trembling heart. It was like burying a part of my life, a cycle. A bond that only existed because I made an effort to keep him alive. And there, in that silent act, the tables turned. Not with scandal, but with dignity. No, there are times when we need to choose our own peace, even if it costs the presence of someone we love. I made that choice that day, and if you've ever been through something similar, if you've ever had to cut a bow to save yourself, comment below. He only writes, "I understand you," or "I know how it is." Sometimes, seeing that others have also had courage helps us move forward. I left that office with less guilt and more clarity. But what I didn't know yet is that Olivia was already moving too. And what would she do next? I was going to test how far my calm went, and my faith. 2 days after the meeting with Brian, I was watering the porch plants when the phone rang. Local number. Answered. It was from the police station. The voice on the other end was polite, but direct. "Mr. Donald, we would like you to appear to provide clarification. This is a complaint filed against you by Olivia Thompson and Liam Graves. For a moment, time stopped. I didn't expect that. Not like that. I got ready slowly. I put on my jacket, grabbed my briefcase with the documents, and went. The path to the police station was silent. Inside the room, I was introduced to a young police officer who held a folder with my name on it. He read the complaint with a neutral face. According to the complaint, you suspended without prior notice access to financial resources that supported part of the couple's expenses. They claim that this has put them in a vulnerable situation and that, considering your advanced age, you may be being manipulated. That hurt me, but I kept my gaze steady. I took out of the folder the statements, the jewelry store receipts, the transfer history, Brian's letter with the summary of my legal rights as a holder. I delivered everything calmly. The policeman leafed through me, looked at me over his glasses. Are you aware that this accusation could be interpreted as attempted financial abuse? I looked him straight in the eye and replied, I am. But who is being abused here? It's me. He said nothing more. He wrote it down, asked for a break. When I returned to the reception, Brian was already waiting for me. He read the papers, raised his eyebrows with a suppressed smile. They're desperate, Donald. I just nodded. There was no more room for surprises, just for surveillance. I knew it. This was not an isolated attack. It was the first move in an attempt to destabilize me, to paint me as a villain in the story they themselves wrote with lies and ingratitude. But what Olivia didn't know, it's just that the old father she thought was weak had now learned to defend himself, and I was about to make a decision that would put everything in place, and she would have no way to prevent it. I came back from the police station without haste. Every step to my door seemed slower than usual, as if time wanted to force me to feel the weight of everything that had happened. I opened the door, left my jacket on the chair, sat on the sofa in the living room, and looked at the clock on the wall. He was stopped. I had frozen at 3:17 a.m., the same time when, days ago, I woke up in a cold sweat with the memory of Ellen asking me to take care of our daughter, but also from me. I stared at that motionless hand for a few minutes, in silence. It was as if, at that moment, I saw time stopped there because I let him run too much without protecting me, because I spent my whole life taking care of others, but I forgot to take care of those who stayed after everyone left. It was no longer pain that I felt. It was something else. It was as if a layer of skin had been torn off, and underneath, something firmer emerged. I was no longer going to ask for explanations, nor to expect respect. I was going to take back what I had left of dignity, and if it cost me Olivia's presence, so be it, because worse than losing her, it was to keep getting lost for her. I sat there in the dark room, and I began to remember everything, of each request for money disguised as an emergency, of every Christmas she missed because she was exhausted. From the birthday she called me at the end of the day and said, I thought it was tomorrow. The times Liam answered my messages for her as if I were a nuisance. I didn't want to see it before. I preferred to believe that it was a phase, that it was the rhythm of life. But no, it was a choice, her choice, and I chose to keep quiet. But now, everything was clear. It was not going to happen anymore. I got up, went to the bedroom and took the blue folder. Inside, the old will tore. Unceremoniously, I opened my laptop and wrote Brian an email. I want to include a clause that prevents any future dispute. Can we do that? In less than an hour, he replied, we can, and we will. At that moment, I was no longer just the wounded father. I became the man who for the first time set a limit, and it wasn't for revenge. It was for emotional justice. It was for me. If this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, will it help me to carry it forward? Like and subscribe here to the channel. It makes more difference than you think. Sometimes, a click of yours can be the push that is missing for someone else to wake up. And you know the strangest thing? It was only after I made this decision that the clock in the living room started working again. The hand made a small jump, 3 and 18, as if time said, "Now, yes. Now the story can go on." And what came right after, it was the greatest proof that I was on the right track, because she didn't stop there. She went further, much more, and he crossed a line that would have no return. I returned to Brian's office in Northbrook 2 days after the confusion at the police station. The sky was cloudy in that typical Illinois way when the wind comes from the lake, and it seems like the whole town is holding its breath. I entered the building slowly, feeling the weight of silence that always precedes a definitive decision. The receptionist greeted me by name, which always surprised me because I'm not a man to show up much. And soon Brian opened the door to his office, making a gesture with his head, as if to say, "Come in, because today the subject is serious." I sat in the same chair where 30 years earlier I had signed the mortgage papers for the house where I raised my daughter. But now it was something else. Now I was there to untie knots, not create new ones. Brian adjusted his glasses, opened a thick briefcase, and began to speak bluntly. "Donald, I need you to be prepared. What we are going to review here is no small feat." He placed a stack of papers on the table, old statements, authorizations, movements that I didn't even remember allowing. Olivia had gone up with a force I never imagined, and when he showed me the dates, the values, the descriptions, I felt a chill down my spine. At first it was small things, $120 at an Evanston drugstore, then $340 at a clothing store in Milwaukee, all while she said she was tight. Then the amounts grew, courses, subscriptions, gifts. The dates coincide with periods when she cried on the phone, saying that Liam was having a hard time at work, that he just needed a little push. I paid. I always paid. Brian looked at me with a calmness that wasn't pity. It was respect. He knew that there is no shame in having loved too much. And I took a deep breath, because facing the truth at once hurts less than reaping crumbs of disappointment over the years. I signed every authorization he put in front of me, one after the other. "Are you sure, Donald?" he asked more than once. "These documents will open everything." I replied, "That's exactly what I want. For the first time in my life, I want to see everything." And it's curious, because while I was signing, I realized that I was moving something bigger than money. I was messing with a kind of freedom that I never knew belonged to me. In the middle of the conversation, as Brian explained the details of a retroactive bank withdrawal, I paused for a second, looked out the window, and felt something tighten my chest. I said, almost as if talking to myself, "Funny, we spend our whole lives thinking we know people. But sometimes the hardest thing is not to find out who they are. It's accepting that they've always been like this." If you, who are listening to me, have ever felt this in your skin, have you experienced the pain of seeing someone in a new, different, and definitive way, stay with me until the end of this story. The most unexpected part of my story is yet to happen. Brian closed the briefcase and passed it on to the will. "You want to do a complete overhaul," he said, "one of those that leave no room for challenge." "I do," I replied. And there we talked about who would be legally responsible, how my assets would be, even small details, such as the lake house that I never finished renovating. For the first time, Olivia was not included in anything, not out of anger, but because I finally understood. Love without limit turns into weakness, and weakness attracts people who have no shame in hurting. I explained to Brian that I wanted to keep everything protected, unquestionable. Every signature, every clause. He said he would take care of everything personally. We looked at the history of the last 5 years, analyzed patterns, studied how she had taken advantage. Not just money, but the certainty that I would never say no. As we left the room, he put his hand on my shoulder. "Donald, you're not being cruel. He is being an adult. Finally." I walked to the car, feeling the cold wind hit my face, but for the first time in months, that wind didn't make me any smaller. It kept me awake. Life was telling me that I still had a choice. He still had a voice. But I had no idea what was about to happen that very night. Something that didn't come from Brian or from me, but of someone I never expected to get into this story. And that's when everything took a turn that even I couldn't imagine. Want to know who it was? That's that. This part, it took me a while to believe it. When Brian called me that afternoon, saying that he had advanced in the analyses, I already imagined that something heavy would come, but I confess, I was not prepared for the size of the wound that still needed to be opened. I walked to his office in Northbrook with almost no sense of the steering wheel in my hands. I sat in the same chair as always, and this time his silence said more than any words. He pulled out the thick briefcase, opened it slowly, and placed in front of me a list of transactions I had never seen. At first I thought they were ordinary purchases, maybe some forgotten subscription. But as he ran his finger through the lines, the truth peeled off in front of me like old paint. Olivia hadn't stopped at the Rolex. She hadn't stopped asking for money for non-existent medical bills. She had used my name, my CPF, my history, to endorse a business card for Liam. I didn't even know this was possible. But Brian, how? I managed to mumble. He showed me the scanned forms. The signature in the corner wasn't mine, but it was a mediocre attempt to imitate it. They wanted me to serve as a guarantee for Liam's business project, the same one who was always complaining about the economy but frequented restaurants where a coffee costs $20. They had tried to use my name, which took me my whole life to keep clean. And they had done it in secret. Brian continued. There was more, much more, $300 dinners in River North, luxury shopping on Michigan Avenue, a weekend stay at a hotel in Wisconsin that cost more than my monthly rent in the 80s. I kept looking at the paperwork, but it was as if my body was far away, far from myself. Brian turned another page, and then came the scam that took my breath away, a pre-approved loan request of $25,000 in my name. It was only not completed because the bank required the holder to appear in person to confirm. I closed my eyes. It was involuntary. The feeling was to be punched in the stomach. There, at that moment, what hurt was not the money. It was not the attempt at fraud. It wasn't the risk. It was thinking that my daughter, that little girl I pushed one day on the swing in the park, thought I was so disposable, so manipulable, that I could even use my future as currency. Donald. I know this is a lot to take in, Brian said, his voice lower, but I could barely hear. The indignation that rose in me was not hot. He wasn't the kind who makes you want to scream. It was cold, cold as freshly broken ice, sharp as a blade. And it was at that moment that I needed to stop, breathe, put my hands on my knees. No. Some memories are like drawers that we avoid opening, but when they open, the smell of the past invades everything. As I stared at those papers, I remembered a specific day. She was about 9 years old, asked me for ice cream after school, and I said I couldn't that week because money was tight. She was sad, but she hugged me and said, "It's okay, Dad. I wait." Today, looking at all this, I think, where did this girl who said, "I wait," get lost? And if you've ever been through something like this, if you have any memory that still accompanies you, or have seen someone who has changed so much to the point of hurting you like this, share it in the comments. Sometimes sharing these memories makes us feel less alone in this world. When I opened my eyes, Brian was waiting, unhurried. He knew that this was not just any moment. It was the moment when my pain turned to clarity. He closed his briefcase and said, "Donald, this is not a slip. It's a standard." I nodded slowly. He continued, "And patterns only change when someone decides to break it." I felt the truth of those words hit deep. I was no longer the man who accepted it quietly. I was no longer the father who thought that love was allowing everything. I left the office different, with firm legs, even with a heavy heart. I walked to the car knowing that this discovery was not the end. It was just the gateway to something even bigger, something I hadn't seen, something that no one told me. But that was about to surface, and my God, when it came, would change everything once again. Do you want to know what was the revelation that awaited me right after? That's that. That part still hurts to remember, but I'll tell you, not now, in the next chapter. I arrived at that cafe in Deerfield with the envelope inside my coat, holding it as if holding a truth that can no longer be hidden. I entered without making a sound, as I always did in life, but that day my silence had another weight. Olivia and Liam were sitting by the window, 2 cappuccinos half full, the kind of drink they ordered when they wanted to look more sophisticated than they really were. When she saw me, her smile was not born. It broke. It was like watching a mask slip. I didn't say hi. I didn't ask how they were. I just pulled up the chair and sat down, slowly. Olivia tried to anticipate. "Daddy, I was going to call you again. We were—" But I took the envelope out of my coat and put it on the table. I didn't push. I didn't dramatize. I just left it there, like someone who puts a mirror in front of someone. Liam craned his neck uncomfortably. Olivia took a deep breath, trying to regain control of the situation, but her hand trembled. I opened the envelope. I first took the extract from Oak Street Jewelry, put it on the saucer. Then the print of the Rolex on William's wrist. Then the business card transactions, the forged signatures, the pre-approved loan application. Each paper landing on the table like a concrete brick. And for the first time in my life, I spoke with a calmness that wasn't sadness, it was certainty. You used my name. They used my credit. They used my trust. Olivia opened her mouth looking for words, but found none. Liam tried to get in the middle, with that voice of his always wanting to explain everything. "Donald, it's not like that, us—" And I raised my hand without looking at him. The gesture was small, but it cut the air. "Don't talk." He was silent at the time. I had never seen that happen. Olivia tried to slide her hand over the papers, as if she could hide them, rearrange them, find a way out of them. "Dad, you don't understand. It was all a misunderstanding. It's more complex than it looks." I leaned in a little, just enough for her to feel the weight of what was coming. "Complex? Complex is looking at someone who gave you everything they had, and find out that this person didn't even give you honesty." She shuddered. I saw it. Liam swallowed. I continued, my voice low, firm, as if finally learning not to ask for affection where there is none. "You both decided that I was a resource, not family. They decided that my signature was useful. That my name was useful, that my pocket was useful." Olivia blinked quickly, trying not to cry. "It's not fair for you to talk like that. We are going through difficulties. You don't know what the last few months have been like." I leaned back in my chair. "You could have said that." She was speechless. I continued, "But you preferred to lie. He preferred to invent disease. He preferred to deceive me. He preferred to use me." The silence that settled felt like a closed room where no one breathed. And the most impressive thing is that for the first time I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel sorry. I felt clarity. All my life I'd given her space to interrupt me, bend me, move me, make me go back. But there was no room for that. It was as if I was finally sitting in the right chair of one's own history. Olivia gave one last card, the one she always used when she wanted to bend me. "Dad, I am your daughter." I looked at her with such a deep calm that I didn't even know I had. "And so I expected more from you." She collapsed in her chair. Liam also tried to hit me with provocation, as if trying to regain territory. "You're exaggerating, Donald. Everyone uses a family card. I didn't need this show." I slowly turned my face to him. "Show? It's what you do by pretending you're a man while living off other people's pockets." He lowered his eyes like a scolded boy. A waiter passed by, hesitated, realized that no one there had a mood for coffee. I gathered the papers, put them back in the envelope. "I didn't come here to ask for an explanation. I came to say that it's over." Olivia suddenly raised her face, frightened. What do you mean by that?" You will no longer have access to anything of mine. The no card. To no account, no document. You will not use my name again, and they won't have the opportunity to try." She widened her eyes. "Dad, you're making a storm." I took a deep breath. "Olivia, I don't make storms anymore. I make decisions." I stood up. "They don't. And they didn't even succeed." I left the cafe feeling the cold air hit my face, but for the first time in many years, that cold didn't hurt. He freed him. As I walked to the car, I felt that something inside me had turned the last page of a chapter that should have ended a long time ago. But little did I know, there was still a conversation. One last conversation that would change everything again. And this, it would come from someone I never imagined. When I returned from the cafe in Deerfield, I still felt the weight of the envelope in my hands. But what really weighed was something else. It was the certainty that I had walked through a door that doesn't open twice. I entered the house slowly, closed the door carefully, as if the very air inside needed to learn to know me again. I sat in the armchair where I had so often fallen asleep after work and stared into the silence as if he could answer me something. But he did not answer. So the next morning, I grabbed the folder with all the documents, put it under my arm, and went to Brian's office. The sky was grey, that grey typical of days when we know that something important is going to happen. Brian received me bluntly, probably already realizing in my eyes that I wasn't there to ask for advice. I was there to finalize a decision. He put all the papers on the table, the permanent blocking of any access by Olivia to my accounts, the cancellation of the authorizations I had given over the years, the revocation of the old powers of attorney that I no longer remembered existed, and finally, the complete reformulation of the will. My name on the cover of the document, Ellen's crossed out only by time, and now, Olivia's being taken by me. I signed each page as if closing windows that were open for years and let the whole house freeze. It wasn't anger, it wasn't a grudge, it was protection. It was putting a blanket over myself for the first time in a long time. When I finished, Brian collected everything with the usual efficiency, but before putting the papers away, he put his hand on one of them and looked at me the way that only those who know our entire lives can look. "Are you okay with that, Donald?" It took me a few seconds to answer, not because I didn't know the answer, but because, for the first time, I wanted to feel it whole. "I'm at peace," I said, and it was true, a sad but clean peace. I left the office with a copy of the formal notification that was to be sent to Olivia, a short, direct document written by Brian with that legal tone that leaves no room for misunderstanding. It informed that from that moment on, she no longer had any financial ties to me. None. No access, no authorization, no future participation in anything I built. No rights to my name or my assets. It was the definitive cut, the line that would never be crossed again. I got home and put the copy of the notification on the kitchen table. I kept looking at her as someone who looks at the photograph of a distant relative. Someone who was once part of it, but who no longer is. And what surprised me the most was realizing that I didn't tremble, neither of pain nor of guilt. All my life, I have put myself in the place of provider, shield, walking second chance. I always believed that love and sacrifice were the same thing. But that day, sitting there with the paper in front of me, I understood something else. Love without respect becomes exploitation. Sacrifice without limit becomes submission. And Father is not a deposit. It is not an emergency reserve. It's not an emotional cane. A self-respecting father teaches his son to respect him too. The notification was sent that same evening. Brian called me only to confirm that the email had been delivered and that the hard copy would be sent by certified mail the next day. I thanked him and hung up. Soon after, the phone vibrated on the table. It was Olivia. I didn't answer. He vibrated again, 2 more times. Then came the message, "Dad, we need to talk about this." I read and closed the screen. My decision was made, and I had already said everything I needed to say. I got up, walked into the living room, and stood before the clock on the wall, the one Ellen gave me on our 10th wedding anniversary. The hand had been frozen at 4:17 a.m. for years, and I had never had it repaired. At that moment, looking at him, I finally understood why. A part of me had stopped there too, and I was waiting for someone to come back to wind it up. But now, I didn't expect it anymore. Life had started again in the most painful way, but also in the most honest way. And as I turned off the lights in the room, I felt something different in the air, a silent prediction that what would come next would not be an attempt by her to explain, nor to apologize. It would be something much bigger and much more revealing. The kind of truth that comes in like a storm, and she was coming. I felt it. When the notification got into Olivia's hands, and I knew this because the delivery notice lit up on my phone, something inside me went completely quiet. It was not victory, it was not joy, it was just silence, a silence that took me a lifetime to learn to deserve. Her reaction came like a storm, first a call, then another, then another. My cell phone screen felt like an alarm ringing non-stop. Long messages, those audios that start with accelerated breathing, tangled words, justifications stuck one on top of the other, as if despair could fit within a minute and a half. I heard none, not out of malice, but because, for the first time, I preferred to listen to myself. Liam, for his part, tried the more predictable route. He called Brian. He thought that with that rehearsed eloquence he always wore at Sunday dinners, he would convince someone that I was emotionally fragile. Brian sent me the screenshot of his message. I sat on the edge of the bed, read slowly, and ended up letting out a short laugh, that laughter that is not born of humor, but of belated recognition. They hadn't understood anything, nothing. It wasn't out of control. It was clarity. And when a man reaches that point in life, that age, clarity weighs more than any tear. The afternoon advanced, and the calls continued. Then came the messages that seemed to have been written by someone else. Promises, quick apologies, crooked explanations, old ties being pulled like ransom ropes. And I just watched, without answering, without fighting, without justifying myself. Just existing, something they had never allowed me to do in peace. Around 6 in the afternoon, I heard footsteps on the sidewalk. I was sitting in the armchair in the living room, with the light off, and the sun slowly descending behind the houses in the neighborhood. The doorbell rang, once, twice, 3 times, then came the knocking on the door, quick, hurried, almost childish. Olivia's voice pierced the wood. "Dad! Father, please, we need to talk seriously. Open, please!" Liam behind her tried to take control of the theater. "Donald, that's a misunderstanding. You're misinterpreting. We can solve this as a family." I stood still, just breathing. And you know, I'll tell you something here in my simple way. There are times when a man's silence says more than any inflammatory speech. I discovered that instantly, because what I didn't say out there made them understand what years of dialogue didn't do. For the first time they were outside, and me, inside. Olivia hit harder, her voice breaking. "Dad, please, I made a mistake. I know I made a mistake, but you can't do that to me." I closed my eyes, hurt. It hurt in places that I thought were already healed. And maybe that's why I say, from the bottom of my chest, there are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. So if this story makes sense to you, if it touches you anywhere, enjoy this video and subscribe. Let this conversation get where it needs to go. On the outside, their despair grew, losing elegance, losing arguments, becoming just fear. Fear of losing access, fear of losing control, fear of losing the comfort they called family. But I felt only serenity, a strange serenity, almost bitter but firm. I didn't open the door, not because I wanted to punish them, but because for the first time I chose to take care of myself. After a few minutes, her voice turned to sobbing. His turned into frustration, and the silence returned. Their car took off from my street as if fleeing from its own shadow. I continued to sit, staring at the closed door. And even though I knew that this moment had been hard, very hard, I also knew that it was not yet the end, because there is always one last try, one last card, a last movement that truly reveals who each one is, and theirs. Theirs was yet to come, and when it came, it even messed with the walls of my house. Want to know what they did next? I'll tell you in the next part. I woke up that morning with the feeling that something inside me had finally found the right place to stay, like a piece that spends years lost in the bottom of a drawer and then suddenly snaps back into the mechanism. The sun had barely risen over Glenview, but I was already sitting at the kitchen table, document folder open and pen in hand. It wasn't anger that moved me. It was not a rematch. It was something much quieter, almost sacred, the right to protect myself. I took a deep breath before signing the last set of New Testament papers. Brian had prepared everything so clearly that even if someone tried to twist it, there would be no loophole. All of my assets, the modest home, the savings, the life insurance, even the small investments I'd been amassing over the course of my entire life, were now earmarked for a community fund for vulnerable seniors, overseen by a serious institution in Chicago. Nothing else would be placed in the hands of those who saw me as an open wallet. And when I signed the final document, I felt something inside me loosen, as if, for the first time, the weight I was carrying had a place to go. Brian closed his briefcase, satisfied, and held out his hand to me. "Donald, this here, it is protection. It's justice." I shook his hand and replied in the simplest way I could, "It's peace." After that, I went with him to the office where we officially recorded all the evidence of the frauds committed by Olivia and Liam. Every statement, every fake signature, every attempt to purchase in my name, everything filed and linked to my CPF. If they tried something new, anything, no matter how small, the banking and legal system would stop them at the first step. There was no need for scandal. There was no need for a fight. It was like putting an invisible wall between me and danger, a firm, silent, and unbreakable wall. I left the building with the cold wind blowing down in my face, and for the first time since Ellen's death, I felt like I was really taking care of myself. I walked to the car slowly, enjoying the feeling of being whole. And there in the Northbrook parking lot, I found myself thinking about something that maybe you, on the other side, understand well. There are moments in life when we don't win by shouting. He wins by choosing the right silence. He who does not humiliate, does not provoke, does not hurt, but who closes. And look, if you've come this far with me, know that the most remarkable moment in this story is yet to come. Really. After sorting out all the legal stuff, I stopped by the cafe where Ellen liked to buy apple pie. I took a piece, sat by the window, and watched the street move. Families walking, children running, people laughing, all following the natural course of life. I felt a strange, almost soft pride in having managed to build something solid with my own hands. A legacy that would not be wasted, nor used as a springboard by those who saw me only as a means. As I took the last sip of coffee, my phone vibrated. It was Brian again. "Everything protocoled. It's done." I just replied, "Thank you." Simple as that. And there, looking at the empty bottom of the cup, something inside me settled down. The truth is that step, the signature, the registration, the official protection, was more than justice. It was the point at which I stopped being a victim and started to own my own story. No screaming, no revenge, no violence, just firmness. Only dignity. When I returned home, I sat on the couch and stared at the clock on the wall. That frozen hand suddenly seemed to make sense. I didn't need him to move forward to understand that I had started over. I had moved my life myself. And as I stood there in silence, I knew that Olivia had no idea what she had just lost. Not the money, not the inheritance, but access to my heart. This, indeed, was a privilege that she should never have treated with disregard. And just when I thought things had stabilized, the unexpected happened. A call, not Olivia's, not Liam's, but from someone who, until that moment, had never been involved. And that would completely change the last chapters of this story. Want to know who it was? I'll tell you in the next part. The call came in the late afternoon, when the sun was already hiding behind the tall trees on my street. I knew that number, but I didn't expect to see it flashing on my phone's display. It was William, the father-in-law, the man who received the $10,000 watch, the man who, until then, I believed to be just another piece in Olivia and Liam's game. I answered slowly, not knowing what to expect. His voice came firm, dry, almost too hard for his age. "Donald, we need to talk." Just by the tone I understood. He knew, and I didn't tell him. Brian had sent, with my permission, a formal summary of everything that had happened. Fraud, forged signature, detour, handling. William arranged to see me the next day at his office in Lake Forest. When I got there, he was standing behind the desk, holding his own watch, that damn Rolex, as if it were proof of a crime. "I didn't know, Donald. I didn't know any of this. I would never have accepted this gift if I had known." He ran his hand over his face, tired. "I broke with them earlier today." The silence that followed was heavy, but not painful. It was the weight of the truth coming to light. He continued, "I withdrew financial support. I have withdrawn access to the companies. I removed everything. Liam is out of my societies, and she's going to have to fend for herself now." I stood there without celebrating, without raising my voice. That's not what I sought, but that's what the truth did when it appeared. It tidied up the whole house, not just my side. William showed me a folder of documents, letters of recommendation he'd written to Olivia, professional referrals she'd received because she was connected to his family. Everything cancelled. He said, "They're about to miss what they should never have taken for granted." Those words, coming from a hard man like him, carried judgment and disappointment in equal measure. I left the office without looking back. On the way back, I received a message from Brian. The bank has just blocked new card application attempts. 2 attempts made today. 2 attempts, even after everything. Even though they knew they were being monitored. It was hard to believe how the need to explore was so ingrained in them that even the immediate risk didn't scare them. The bank sent me another alert later. An online loan attempt in my name had been immediately barred and attached to the process. I sat on the couch and just breathed. It was not revenge. It was a consequence. Life responds faster than any court. 2 days later, the news came that I wasn't looking for, but that arrived anyway. Olivia had been fired. A financial inconsistency at work. It had no direct relationship with me, but it was enough for the company to examine her history. And the history, well, he talked to himself. A person who uses his own father's name to open fake business cards and apply for loans would certainly have done much more without witnesses. Liam was not far behind. I learned from an acquaintance, because bad news flies, that he had lost an important contract and been suspended for conduct that hurt professional integrity. I didn't have to ask what it was. I didn't need to know details. The pieces were falling off by themselves. I sat there, listening to the imaginary ticking of the clock standing on the wall, and I realized something simple but profound. I didn't have to knock anyone down. They were the ones who threw themselves. All their lives, they thought they could walk on anyone, lie, manipulate, to step over people who only wanted the best for them. And now, when everything has collapsed, it collapsed exactly where it had to collapse, in its own choices. The feeling that came to me was not joy nor sadness. It was justice. Quiet, no spotlight, no audience, no scandal. Justice in its purest form, natural consequence. And it was exactly when this sensation settled in my chest that I heard the unexpected sound. A car parked in front of my house, doors slamming, voices that I recognized from afar. They had returned, but this time it was not to apologize, not even to plead. I knew from the tone of the voices crossing the street that something much bigger was about to happen. Something that would completely change the way that story would end. And my God, as it has changed. Want to know what they said when they rang my doorbell that night? I'll tell you in the next part. I walked to Glenview Park in the late afternoon, the same park where, weeks before, I had sat on the wooden bench and felt the weight of the world fall right in the middle of my chest. Now it was different. The air was lighter, as if every step I took undid an old knot that I carried without realizing it. The dry leaves crackled under my feet, and I let the wind touch me, as if letting life pass without fear. I sat on the same bench, staring at the empty swing that was once Olivia's favorite place when she was a child. I remembered her running, with her hair tied to the side, calling me to push her just one more time. Always just one more time. The image came so clear that for a moment I felt like I could reach out and hold that time again. But time does not come back. It just shows what was left by the wayside. And sitting there, I realized a truth that took too long to make sense. I haven't lost my daughter now. I only found out finally who she had become. And it was not my responsibility to rescue versions of someone who no longer existed. Hurt. We always feel when we let go of what we loved. But the pain of that day, it wasn't of the same nature as the pain I felt before. She was not the one who tears. It was another. A calm pain, a pain that understands. I looked up at the sky, looking for a place where Ellen's memory could fit. And it fit. Because in that moment I felt, in a way that I can't explain, that I had finally honored what she had always said, even without words. Protect yourself, Donald. Don't let anyone diminish you. For many years, I tried to be Olivia's safe haven, as if my life was an anchor so that she wouldn't get lost. But I realized there, in that late afternoon, that sometimes we don't save the other by holding on. We save by letting go. I don't blame Olivia. I blame the silence I let grow between us. I blame my fear of saying enough when there was still time to fix something. But I am also grateful for having finally understood that love is not a contract of infinite suffering. I stood there watching the children play, feeling the cold wind rise through the sleeves of the coat, and I realized something that may take years for some people to understand. The real victory is not winning the fight, it's winning yourself back. And that's what happened to me. I'm back. I came back to myself. I returned to my peace. Still, as I got up from the bench, a strange sensation accompanied me to the exit of the park, as if something was approaching. One last piece of this absurd puzzle that I lived. One last truth, one last word. And my God, when she arrived, I understood that I hadn't heard everything yet. Someone still needed to speak. And he was someone I never imagined would have the courage to approach me again. Want to know who it was? I'll tell you in the last part. As I walked out of the park that afternoon, with the wind beating slowly in my face, I ran into someone on the sidewalk I didn't expect to see again anytime soon. Olivia. But it wasn't the woman who tried to manipulate me, nor the one who ran after me asking for access to what I had. It was just my daughter. With a tired face, red eyes, and a low voice, she said only, "Dad, I've come to give it back to you." And he put in my hand the Rolex he had given to William. He didn't want to stay either. I held the watch for a few seconds, not as a symbol of victory, but as a symbol of the end. There was nothing more to discuss. There was no more bridge to cross. For the first time, I looked at her without guilt, without anger, without the obligation to fix anything. I only saw a human being lost in his own choices. That's it. I couldn't carry it. We walked side by side to the parking lot without saying almost a word. And before getting into the car, she asked, "Sir, will you ever forgive me?" I took a deep breath, Forgiveness sometimes is not coming back. It's letting go. Daughter, I've already let you go. The rest, you are the one who will have to build. She nodded and left as if she understood that the door is not locked. It is just not open anymore. After that, I sold the Rolex. I took every penny and put it into the community fund I had created. That dirty fake money turned into something clean, useful and real. It became winter blankets, medicines, hot meals. It became dignity for people who had no one to defend them. And looking at it all today, sitting on the porch of my house, I realized that the real victory was not taking anything from Olivia. It was to recover myself. Life has taught me a simple and profound lesson. Love without limit ceases to be love and becomes submission. And limit is not punishment. It is protection. It is telling the world calmly where I end and where the other begins. I go on in peace now. I walk through the park without that shadow on my chest. I sleep better. I recover small joys that I let fall asleep. The longing exists, of course, but there is more to peace. And if you stayed with me until this last bit of my story, I really appreciate it. Thank you for following me, for listening to an old man who is still learning to preserve himself. Your like is like a silent hug that warms this space here and reminds me that we are never totally alone. And your registration is like an invitation to come back for the next coffee, to continue this gentle prose that we share here. Tell me in the comments which city you're watching. It's beautiful to see how our stories meet, even far from each other. And it activates the bell. That way you don't miss out when the coffee is brewed again. And before you go, don't go away yet. Listen to the next true story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another amazing story.